Calling the meeting to order. This is meeting number 62 of the Standing Committee on International Trade. Welcome to all our witnesses. We very much appreciate you taking your valuable time to spend a bit of time with us this afternoon, and we'll all hopefully leave here a little bit more enlightened on some of these issues. Today's meeting, of course, is taking place in a hybrid format pursuant to the House Order of June 23, 2022, and therefore members are attending in person in the room and remotely using the Zoom application. I'd like to make a few comments for the benefit of the witnesses and the members. Please wait until I recognize you by name before speaking. When speaking, please speak slowly and clearly. For those participating by video conference, click on the microphone icon to activate your mic, and please mute yourself when you are not speaking. With regard to interpretation, for those on Zoom, you have the choice at the bottom of your screen of either floor, English or French. For those in the room, you can use the earpiece and select the desired channel. A reminder that all comments should be addressed through the chair. For members in the room, if you wish to speak, please raise your hand. For members on Zoom, please use the raised hand function. The clerk and I will manage the speaking order as best we can, and we appreciate your patience and understanding in this regard. Please also note that during the meeting, it is not permitted to take pictures in the room or screenshots on Zoom. Should any technical challenges arise, please advise me. Please note that we may need to suspend for a few minutes if there is difficulty with the translation. Pursuant to Standing Order 1082 and the motion adopted by the committee on Friday, November the 25th, the committee is resuming its study of non-tariff barriers in Canada's existing and potential trade agreements. With us today, we have as an individual Stuart Beck by video conference. From the Canadian Agri-Food Trade Alliance, Adam Taylor, Executive Director, and Dave Carey, Treasurer. From the Canadian Cattle Association, we have Dennis Laycraft, Executive Vice President by video conference, Jack Schaaf, Foreign Trade Chair, and from the International Cheese Council of Canada, Joe Del Ferro is the Chair, and Patrick Pelliconi is the Vice Chair. Welcome to all of you. We appreciate you very much being here. We will start with opening remarks for up to 5 minutes. Mr. Carey, would you like to go first, please?
Good afternoon. Thank you for the invitation to be here. My name is Dave Carey. I'm an executive board member of the Canadian Agri-Food Trade Alliance, or CAFTA. Joining me today is Adam Taylor, our interim executive director. As this committee has heard from us before, CAFTA represents 90% of farmers, ranchers, processors, and agri-food exporters who depend on trade. The sectors CAFTA represents support over 1 million Canadian jobs in urban and rural communities across our country. On behalf of our members, we thank the committee for initiating this study on non-tariff barriers. This has been a long-standing ask from CAFTA, and we're hopeful this study will show why the reduction and elimination of non-tariff trade barriers is so vital to the agri-food sector and those that rely on it for their livelihoods. Our remarks will provide a brief overview of non-tariff trade barriers in agricultural trade, and our individual members will focus more on the product-specific non-tariff barriers that are holding Canada back from reaching its full potential in many of our most important FTAs, and by extension, the market that these agreements are supposed to unlock. Simply put, non-tariff trade barriers, or non-tariff measures, NTMs, remain the most significant source of disruption impacting Canada's agriculture and agri-food trade in our broader national economy. These trade barriers tend to be used for specific products in specific markets, making it harder to identify, quantify, and resolve them. The three main types of NTMs are direct government support of a sector, sanitary and phytosanitary measures, and regulatory and technical requirements. The total impact of direct subsidies and other non-tariff measures is equivalent to 42% of the total value of global agriculture production, generating a $1.7 trillion global impact. The OECD has calculated that an average of $817 billion US of state support was provided to agriculture annually from 2019 to 2020, a 13% increase from just a year earlier. The United Nations Food and Agriculture Organization published a report in 2021 that found that over 2/3 of agricultural support is considered price distorting and largely harmful to the trade environment. The bulk of agriculture subsidies are within the EU, the UK, China, the US, and India. When looking at both industrialized and developing countries, some trade watchers predict that overall global agriculture subsidies could reach $2 trillion by 2030. These subsidies don't only disadvantage agricultural producers in Canada, they also create higher prices for consumers and are working against global food security and efforts to combat climate change. Similarly, sanitary and phytosanitary and wider technical and regulatory measures are also a significant, persistent, and costly challenge for Canadian agri-food exporters. SPS and related regulatory barriers have increased substantially, going from 1 million measures registered in 2000 to more than 4 million registered in 2021. SPS barriers are most prevalent in the agriculture and agri-food sector and have at times been used by countries as protectionist tools, disadvantaging imported products over domestic ones. As you might expect, technical and regulatory barriers come in many forms and often persist long after tariffs fall to zero. Yet they act as a barrier to taking advantage of a new market, even if there's an FTA in place. While the impact of non-tariff measures varies by product, our own research shows that the average price of NTMs in agriculture and agri-food is approximately 10%, which accounts to $362 billion in global costs and $4.7 billion cost to Canada. These sanitary and technical barriers also hinder small and medium-sized exporters from accessing international markets, since they generally do not have the resources to comply with these measures. Overall, non-tariff measures increase the cost of agriculture goods and have a significant impact on the price paid by consumers. In a time of record food prices, we need to open access to agricultural trade to make food more affordable and accessible. This study gives us an important opportunity to truly understand how the persistence of these barriers in many of our most significant FTAs is hurting Canadian agri-food exporters and consumers. We hope it also clearly demonstrates why greater focus on the elimination of non-tariff measures needs to be top of mind for those negotiating and implementing Canada's free trade agreements. CAFTA calls on the committee to take this time to truly identify, quantify these barriers and work with us to develop solutions to resolve them. Doing so is critical to job creation, economic growth, rural economic development, and keeping food plentiful and affordable, here at home and around the world. We look forward to playing an active role in this study as this study takes shape, and we thank all members in advance for taking this important work so seriously. Thank you. We'd welcome your questions.
Thank you very much, sir. Mr. Schaaf, please, for up to 5 minutes.
Okay, thank you. And good afternoon. My name is Jack Chafe. I'm Chair of Foreign Trade Committee with the Canadian Cattle Association and a beef producer from southwestern Ontario. With me today is Dennis Laycraft, Executive Vice President of CCA. We gratefully have the opportunity to contribute to today's committee study on non-tariff barriers and how these barriers prevent the Canadian beef industry from growing our exports. CCA represents 60,000 beef producers from coast to coast. The beef industry is a significant driver of the economical growth, second largest single source of farm income in Canada, contributing $22 billion in sales to the gross domestic product and supporting over 350,000 equivalent jobs on a full-time basis. Trade is essential to the beef industry's long-term sustainability and profitability. The beef industry exports close to 50% of the beef produced here in Canada, and approximately 40% of the value of each animal comes from international trades. In 2022, Canada exported $6 billion in beef products and live cattle sales. Our industry provides high-quality, nutritious, sustainable protein, and with global demand for protein, the world needs more Canadian beef. However, our industry faces non-tariff barriers that adds costs to our producers and at times prevents us from reaching certain markets altogether. These barriers, both domestic and international in nature, and we appreciate any recommendations that this committee can bring forth to address these and the trade arrogance. Many of our non-trade barriers are rooted from the restrictions implemented during the discovery of BSE back in 2003. In 2021, Canada obtained the BSE negligible risk status from the World Organization for Animal Health, which acknowledges Canada of having the lowest risk of BSE, similar to U.S. Yet some of these restrictions still remain and have impacted our export opportunities for the Canadian beef industry. In Canada, the BSE air regulations requirements remain in place, and despite having BSE negligible risk status, processors need to remove specified risk materials, better known as SRMs, in packing plants. The difference between Canada and U.S. on SRM regulations increased costs for the Canadian beef industry, adding over $3 million a year, $30 million a year to these costs. This puts the Canadian beef industry at an unnecessary competitive disadvantage compared to other countries. Similar Canadian beef producers are negatively impacted by segregation requirements in the U.S. for Canadian live cattle at processing facilities due to the Canadian-American requirements to ship beef into South Korea based on our BSE regulations. Internationally, one of our most non-tariff barriers is the rejection of our persitic acid, or PEA, during beef processing for European Union and United Kingdom. The PEA is commonly used food safety intervention around the world and is designed for excess food safety and meat hygiene. Canada has a world-renowned food safety and meat inspection system that recognizes most of the countries that we export to. We need a full systems approval between Canada and the UK and the EU. For Canadian beef producers, we'll have the opportunity to grow these markets. While we do not have time to explain all the non-tariff barriers on my opening remarks, CCA would like to submit to the committee a list of all the non-tariff barriers affecting the beef industry. CCA appreciates the opportunity to provide input and would please to provide further information to the committee. Thank you.
Sir, Mr. Del Ferro, please, for up to 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Members of the committee, good afternoon. My name is Joe Del Ferro, Chair of the International Cheese Council of Canada, or we'll use the acronym the ICCC. In my everyday life, I work as president of Finica Food Specialties Limited, an importer of fine specialty foods based in the Toronto area since 1968. I am joined today by Patrick Pelliccioni, Vice Chair of the ICCC and President of Jan-K Overwheel Limited. The ICCC was founded in 1976. We are an association of small and medium-sized cheese importers and their suppliers. Our members are Canadian-based importers of cheese. We also have associate members who are cheese producers and processors from various countries that have international trade agreements with Canada. The ICCC accepts the rationale underlying Canada's supply-managed dairy sector. In partnership with Global Affairs Canada, GAC, we operate within the system with the shared objective of ensuring the system both respects Canada's trade commitments and works for Canadian businesses and consumers. However, we have concerns on how Canada's TRQ allocation and administration policy has affected importers and their customers across the country. As such, today, I am here to provide the real-world perspective on the impacts of these non-tariff barriers. I will also offer some recommendations on how Canada could address these issues in current and future agreements. First, parliamentarians must seriously consider how the TRQ allocation and administration, wholly chosen and administered by Canada, can create unintended yet serious impacts on Canadian businesses. I'll use CITA as an example. Though market access was theoretically expanded, the implementation of CITA created severe challenges for cheese importers across the country. The allocation formula for the CITA, cheeses of all types, TRQ, leads the allocations to vary in size drastically from year to year, from hundreds of thousands of kilos one year to barely 10,000 kilos the other. Not only is this challenging to run an import program with such uncertainty, but it forces importers to rely on transfers, which is when we have to rent quota from other CITA quota holders for a fee, thus increasing the cost for Canadian consumers. At times, the transfer price gets so high that some ICCC members just can't compete and must settle for their meager initial allocation. Second, as a result of the TRQ allocation mechanism across various trade agreements, importers receive allocations that are not economically viable. In our industry, an allocation is called economically viable when it's about the size of a shipping container, that is, about 20,000 kilos. Something like 10,000 kilos may seem big, but we are simply unable to support the cost associated with the load smaller than 20,000 kilos because of the fixed costs of bringing in the cheese from overseas or overland and distributing it. While we have shared this concern with Global Affairs Canada for years, we have yet to see allocations that actually reflect the needs and the realities of businesses who participate in cheese trade. Canada's approach to TRQ allocation and administration has had several negative effects on members. The lack of quota available for distributors has created uncertainty. Our members, who import products as their livelihood, face the prospect of not being able to fulfill their contractual obligations with the businesses they supply. This uncertainty has stifled economic growth. Moreover, the lack of available quota has also increased costs and bureaucratic work for companies who are forced to hunt down and pay for those transfers. Last, members are unable to establish long-term relationships with suppliers, which is essential for a successful cheese program, due to the uncertainty in GAC's annual TRQ allocation model. This has led some companies to lose customers at a cost of millions of dollars. The unknown outcome of Global Affairs TRQ Phase 2 review, which initially started in 2019, is creating ambiguity and inhibiting business planning. Moreover, it may require importers to significantly change their business models, and if the quota policy that emerges from this review is unfavorable to our industry. We encourage the government to incorporate this committee's eventual report into its deliberations as it revises its TRQ allocation and administrative policy. It is imperative to ensure that Canada's approach aligns with our country's trade obligations and reflects Minister Ng's mandate to ensure that trade benefits small and medium-sized enterprises across Canada. Thank you.
Del Ferro, on to Mr. Beck, please, for up to 5 minutes. Mute, Mr. Beck. Can you unmute yourself?
I should know better. I'm sorry, Madam Chair. Good afternoon, members of the Standing Committee on International Trade. I'm here today to discuss the pressing issue of non-tariff barriers in international trade. As a former High Commissioner to India, I was there when we initiated negotiations for a comprehensive economic partnership agreement with that country, which unfortunately did not come to fruition. However, I'm pleased that we are now taking a more pragmatic approach, recognizing that an early progress agreement will yield more modest but achievable successes. And for those Saskatchewan farmers, they understand some of the impacts of non-tariff barriers on their business going into India. As a former Assistant Deputy Minister for International Business, Development, Innovation and Investment with then the Department of Foreign Affairs and International Trade, now Global Affairs Canada, I understand the critical role that strong trade agreements play in Canada's global trade development success. Additionally, as a CEO of the Asia Pacific Foundation of Canada, I have witnessed firsthand the importance of trade agreements in developing Canada's markets in Asia. Non-tariff barriers have become a significant concern for global trade. And as we all know, there can be technical standards, regulations, licensing requirements, quotas, subsidies, and administrative procedures. In addition, the challenges associated with NTBs are numerous, including a lack of transparency and their deployment due to irritants in bilateral relationships. These factors make it difficult for Canadian businesses to navigate the regulatory and political environment, leading to increased costs and time complying with ever-changing regulations. Protectionist NTBs, particularly in the developed world, are gaining increased prominence today, appearing in the form of technical regulations, challenging foreign producers to meet subsidies only available to domestic producers and licensing requirements that are more readily obtainable by the domestic producers as well. Canada's economy relies heavily on the SME community, and we are particularly susceptible to NTBs. SMEs lack the resources to navigate complex regulatory environments, leading to disproportionate compliance costs and creating barriers to entry, increasing the prices for Canadian products. Negotiating and implementing agreements to reduce or eliminate NTBs is a complex process, as evidenced by the difficulty in concluding an FTA with India. However, it is crucial to address these issues and to foster a more open and fair global trading system. and compliments to the committee for undertaking the study. Finally, I would be remiss if I did not acknowledge that Canada is not exempt from the issue of NTVs. I have heard criticism of our supply management system from many counterparts as a trade commissioner, as a head of mission, and as president and CEO of the Asia Pacific Foundation of Canada. While I understand the political imperative of protecting our market and farmers, I believe it's essential to consider the potential benefits of competing with our respected, high quality, and safe products in Asian markets, where the middle-class consumer is rapidly growing. So thank you for your attention, and I look forward to answering any questions that you may have.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Beck. I will now open the floor for questions. Mr. Barlow, for 6 minutes, please.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair, and thanks to our witnesses for being here. I wanted to start with CAFTA and Canadian Cattle Association. I know that the current government has reached a market access agreement with the United Kingdom to join the CPTPP, but they have done so without addressing some of the issues that you've talked about, like SPS, like carcass washing. What kind of a missed opportunity is this for Canadian producers when we see such a massive discrepancy of between exports from the United Kingdom and exports from Canada to the UK, and the amount of a $25 million difference, and that gap is growing?
Captain could perhaps start generally and then let Cattle speak to specifics, but I think we had concerns where we had heard from Canadian negotiators there's concerns around the United Kingdom's ability to meet some of our scientific rigor standards. I think that was certainly a concern. Maybe Adam will have some more general comments before Cattle weighs in on some specifics.
Yeah, I'll just say one of the things we were most concerned about was that the lack of addressing this in the CETA would transfer to the UK accession to the CPTPP, and that's exactly what has happened. Is now we see a lot of these things that are persisting in CETA that are shutting out us from that lucrative market where we have an FTA in place, and these technical barriers are persisting. And so the failure to address it in the recent accession to the CPTPP is a huge concern of ours, and why we want to see it addressed in the eventual bilateral talks.
Yeah, so I'll chime in there. So in 2022, Canada exported $0 worth of beef into the UK, where they exported 33 million into Canada. So basically, there's still the bilateral negotiations going on there, and what we're asking for is the full systems approval from Canada with our food and our food safety system, so we can continue exporting to other countries under the same regime as we could into the UK.
Thank you. Thank you. And this was obviously a horrifically missed opportunity when you had the UK trying to come into the CPTPP, where we could address some of these non-tariff trade barriers on beef specifically. Has the government given you any reason why they clearly failed to address this before agreeing to the accession of the UK to the CPTPP?
I'm going to turn that over to Dennis Laycraft, my associate.
Thanks, Jack, and thanks, John, for the question. I think were other considerations, obviously, with the accession to the CPTPP than just agriculture. That's been an indication we've received. I couldn't agree more about the missed opportunity, and I know our regulators also feel like the UK is not meeting the SPS conditions that the rest of the people who are now part of the CPTPP are, and that's one of our great concerns. Is with the very first country and our group, but in this case the United Kingdom joining, we're already starting to erode the ambition that was achieved in the original CPTPP, which I'd consider one of the gold standards that really addressed a lot of and got rid of the non-tariff barriers that had plagued some of the countries who are now part of it. So this is a hugely missed opportunity. But that said, we are negotiating the bilateral, and we're certainly going to come out opposing a cession of the UK when it does come to Parliament, until these issues are properly resolved.
Thank you, Mr. Laycraft. Now back to CAFTA. We used to have a lucrative pulse and pea trade with India, which we saw due to some mistakes by the government had been declined significantly. Fumigation was one non-tariff trade barrier that was put up. We're seeing some opportunities there with potential new free trade agreement with India. Can you maybe give us a bit of an update on where we are with that and addressing the fumigation issue?
I can say right now we're working very closely with agriculture officials, are staying in close contact with us and saying that progress is being made to try to advance and conclude an agreement with India. I think that's as Mr. Beck indicated earlier, that's been an agreement that's very difficult to negotiate. It's been difficult to negotiate for a number of years. These are the very issues that we need to resolve. I think India is a complicated market. I mean, over half of that country is employed in the agriculture sector, so it's there's a lot of sensitivities there, which we're going to have to resolve. Specifically to fumigation, we're still trying to figure out exactly where the
Thanks,
state of
Mr.
play
I
is.
Time for one last quick question. The USTR releases an annual report on foreign trade barriers to the National Trade Estimates report. We don't do something similar in Canada, which I think would highlight issues like front-of-pack labeling, which the United States has identified as a trade issue. They are now talking about mandatory country of origin of labeling again. What kind of benefit would such a report have for Canadian producers and commodity manufacturers to have such a report here in Canada?
I think it would be absolutely critical. The USTR also benefits from having an entire division dedicated to trade implementation, not just signing trade deals, but making sure they get done. So I think hopefully part of this study is articulating those trade irritants that exist to make sure we don't replicate them in future trade agreements, but also making sure we deploy Canadian resources to resolve the trade irritants we're currently dealing with. And there is a difference between deploying commissioners versus technical barriers to trade. The India solution is more of a technical issue on some of those things. So it would be very beneficial to have that sort of thing in-house, and we hope that this committee would be a part of beginning that.
Thank you very much. Mr. Arya, please, for 6 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I have a question for Mr. Beck. Mr. Beck, you were the Canadian High Commissioner in India when I was actively involved with the Indo-Canada Auto Business Chamber. One thing I should say that the Comprehensive Economic Partnership Agreement did not fail because of you. There are bigger issues around that we know. I just want to bring to your notice last week, or rather early this week, last week, I guess, the United States National Security Advisor, Jake Sullivan, gave a talk. National Security Advisor of the United States, I thought he's more concerned with terrorism, the cyber crimes, the wars that are going around. But he talked on international economic agenda, wherein he brought in the current United States international policy that integrates with his domestic economic policy and foreign policy. I mean, how all these things integrate, he talked about. And one of the strategies mentioning, he said, I'll quote, moving beyond traditional trade deals to new international economic partnerships focused on the core challenges of our time. He said, we do intend to pursue modern trade agreements, asking what our trade policy is now, narrowly framed as plans to reduce tariffs further, is simply the wrong question. The right question is, how does trade fit into our international policy? That's what he asked. And for those who says international economic partnerships are not free trade agreement, he said, for the problems we are trying to solve today, the traditional model doesn't cut it. We need a new approach. Simply put, in today's world, trade policy needs to be about more than tariff reduction, and trade policy need to be fully integrated into our economic strategy at home and abroad. We know that every country practices their own non-tariff barriers, including Canada. The developing countries are now looking at where their strategic advantage is and bringing the new rules, basically bringing in new NTBs. For example, Indonesia has import-export ban on raw nickel ore. Democratic Republic of Congo has put in domestic processing requirements for the cobalt mining that takes place there. Tanzania on the gold and copper concentrates, same with Zambia. So developing countries are bringing those. Developed countries are pursuing, like the United States is having international economic partnership agreements with separately with Canada on one hand, Japan and South Korea on the other. It has got its own with India and countries like Angola, etc. So are we discussing today, is it relevant for the future trade agreements or the economic partnerships that we are foreseeing? What are your comments on this?
Thank you very much, Mr. Arya. I think you're hitting on a very important point, but the reality is we have a lot of, we have companies that are doing business on a day-to-day basis that have to deal with tariffs and non-tariff barriers in countries. I think the future, and particularly if you take a look at the Canadian economy and how we're evolving, a lot of the technology that's driving our competitiveness and our effectiveness in the global marketplace needs to be considered in the context of how we're doing business. So in the context of India, for example, and this is one of the things I was trying to discuss at the time I was High Commissioner, when we sell pulses to India or potash, we're very susceptible to non-tariff barriers. We're very susceptible to the whims and fancies of the geopolitical relationship on a bilateral basis. But if we build and understand how we can work with India to help them build their own agricultural technology expertise in collaboration with us, in a partnership with us, it changes the dynamic to a certain degree. You're still going to have to deal with it's important for us to have the pulse exports going into India or the potash exports going to India or the other commodities that we do. They're very susceptible to price demands in the marketplace and also susceptible to non-tariff barriers. But when you talk about partnerships in agricultural technology and working with India to help them improve their efficiencies and productivity, but also help us in what we're trying to do in that particular space, it has a much larger impact on our global marketplace. So as an example, if we're working with India on helping them become more efficient in the productivity of their agricultural sector through geospatial relationships, through the technologies that we're developing here in Canada very astutely, whether it's through the protein supercluster and other places, if we work with India in a partnership on that when it comes to data in the agricultural space, that's a different dimension of an economic partnership. And these are some of the things that we should be building into the early progress agreement that we're talking about now, because this is something that's in the interest of both India and Canada. We benefit from having more access to their data because they're much more, as you can imagine, Canada is a small market of 35 to 40 million people, depending on how you want to determine the number, but India's 1.4 billion people, and so the data that comes out of that, just in the mobile sector for mobile farmers, and almost everybody has a mobile phone in India now. Some of the data that's not personalized, that's in the agricultural space, will be a benefit to us when it comes to building the algorithms that will make us more effective in the global marketplace, not just in the market of India. So that's how we have to start thinking, but we can't abandon the reality that we have exporters that depend on managing the tariff rate schedules in various countries. So it's really the what I would call the A-level agreement, like CPTPP versus just having a standard trade agreement.
Thank you very much, Mr. Beck. On to Mr. Savard Tremblay for 6 minutes, please.
Alors bonjour, merci.
Hello, thank you, Madam Chair. Greetings to all of my colleagues. Greetings to the witnesses. Thank you for being here and for your testimonies. Mr. Chafe, my first question is to you. Firstly, I'm going to ask an obvious question, so no need to develop on it, but we can summarize that you are rather disappointed in the adhesion, the way in which UK is adhering to the trade agreement.
Very disappointed in the citation for UK coming into the CTPP without basically addressing the trade barriers with the carcass wash.
Comment d'après
So, I know that in the past there was a comprehensive economic and trade agreement with the European Union, and we heard that the dairy sector was sacrificed, but we got advancements for the beef sector. But now, with this new agreement, why are we making the same mistake?
I guess that's a good question. Why are we making the same mistake? And it's happening again. Like with I mentioned before about the UK, we weren't getting any beef in there in 2022, where they were shipping $33 million worth of beef in here. And on the EU side of it, the trade deficit last year was $100 million. So definitely disturbing to the beef industry.
Vous avez mentionné.
You also mentioned that there was a non-tariff barrier. Do you know about any others that exist? Could you list a few of the other non-tariff barriers?
I'll maybe turn that over to Dennis Laycraft.
Yeah, thanks, Jack. Clearly, the approval of our meat hygiene system and interventions is the number one impediment. Our processors, just put it candidly, are not prepared to turn down our food safety system to go to Europe. They want to create the impression that we're in some way inferior, when in fact we have one of the strongest food safety programs in the world. If we get into some more difficult, and we heard it earlier, tariff rate quota administration procedures, we have a lot of certification requirements to get into that market all the way back to the herd of birth of the animals. But what we are seeing right now is a whole new proliferation of measures that are going to thicken the border with the European Union. Right now, they're just publishing a rule on, quote, deforestation that
Excuse me,
require
Mr. Laycraft, could you raise the boom, as they call it, on your... That's it. Thank you very much, sir.
Sorry.
Please proceed.
They're adding some new measures on deforestation, which would require right back to every farm and ranch that cattle are raised on, that there would have to be an attestation that there was no deforestation, even though Canada will be recognized as, quote, a low-risk country. Our big concern actually is protecting native grasslands. It isn't forestation or deforestation. So there are a range of things like that that are coming from the EU, and candidly, all of those things together are making it a more difficult market to export. And we were very disappointed, as was indicated earlier, when we just simply used that as the transition agreement with the UK several years ago. That's probably when we should have drawn the line in the sand to begin with. But right now, we need to draw that line in the sand before they're allowed to join the CPTPP.
Bon, justement, là, vous dites qu'il faudrait le faire absolument.
Yes, you say we have to do it absolutely before they join. We haven't seen a bill. It hasn't been tabled. We haven't studied it in this committee. Hopefully it will come sooner than later. Thank you for your proposals. We're taking note of them. So what would be the immediate danger if ever we signed it right now without addressing this problem?
No, I think the immediate danger to us is first of all, we reduce the ambition. We're setting a terrible example as far as other countries that join the CPTPP, that they can come in without addressing a number of these non-tariff barriers that, when we joined or brought the countries together, were effectively resolved with the current group of countries that are in there. And then the second thing is we take away any real need for them to address those issues in a timely manner. There are bigger issues that they're looking for that are attracting them to the CPTPP and the large group of economies that are in that. So when we have certainly more strength in our negotiating position as a result of the accession conversations, we need to use that strength to address these issues and get these things fixed. So moving forward, as was discussed earlier, trade can occur on the basis of natural advantage.
Jennings for 6 minutes, please.
Well, thank you. And I just, this is all very interesting, very complicated. So I'd just like to get some clarification here. It's my understanding, for instance, just to find out where we are in terms of what we can do with the CPTPP part of things, what we can do with the UK bilateral coming out of CITA. It's my interest. I had some information the other day that Australia, for instance, had written a side letter, signed a side letter agreement with the UK about their accession to CPTPP that removed the investor-state dispute mechanism between Australia and the UK, as that is in CPTPP now, but their side letter said it wouldn't apply between those two countries. So it seems that there's some time here where we can do things like that. And perhaps, I'm not sure if Mr. Beck or Mr. Laycraft might have some comment on that as to, where we are in the game and what we can do and can't do right now.
Go ahead, Dennis.
Yeah, that's, I think, the most important question in this negotiation. And going back to Australia and New Zealand, they had bilateral negotiations that they completed before they agreed to the accession. And both countries, from my understanding, are saying they need to implement those bilaterals as part of the condition of their support for the accession. What is interesting, Australia and New Zealand are going to get unlimited duty-free access for beef. Apparently, there was some political reaction in the UK to that. So they came back to Canada and said, we are only going to get a tariff rate quota of 14,000 tons that we are going to share with 5 other countries, which is obviously completely an unlevel playing field with Australia and New Zealand. The real question is, can we, and you're right, that some of these deals have to be dealt with in the bilateral agreement. But that's the point we've been saying all along to the negotiators is don't get the accession deal ahead of the bilateral negotiations. We have time right now to push on the bilateral negotiations. I think we need to make it clear to them that in order to support this through Parliament, you need to make some serious concessions and bring your requirements in line with the WTO, with both the World Organization on Animal Health and Codex. And that's pretty much the goals that we achieved with the current membership of CPTPP and what every new member should meet.
And I would agree with what Dennis is saying, and I can say that now because I'm not part of the government anymore. You always have to kind of understand what your leverage is. And right now, if in the context of a bilateral relationship, allowing the UK to accede before having completed the necessary elements of a bilateral problem, you are ceding some of your leverage. And so, when you think about other countries that want to accede to CPTPP, such as Korea, we already have a bilateral agreement with Korea, and it would make some sense to do that because it's, bringing them on into the CPTPPs will be relatively simple. This is going to be much more complicated with the UK. And again, one understands the geopolitical imperative that's involved with this, but at the same time, it does put our beef exporters at a disadvantage. So you have to kind of weigh one against the other at the end of the day, and we need to have some leverage, quite frankly.
2 minutes. Okay, I'll just turn to the cheese, the wonderful Italians here. We had another Italian here talking about cheese the other day. It's great to hear that. I just wanted to know where you stand on this. I know did you have anything to comment about the CPTPP quickly, and then I can dive into cheese in a bigger way. But
from our perspective, first of all, thank you for your question, Madam Chair. From our perspective, it all has to do with the allocation model of the quotas. If we can exercise those allocations in a user-friendly way, we would be able to leverage far more access of cheeses into Canada for Canadian consumers.
And that is all under Canadian control, those allocations. And right now, I get the impression they're dominated by the big players, the processors.
It varies by the trade agreement, but yes, for the most part, yes.
And why does it go up and down so much every year?
If we can isolate the CIIT quota allocation model, we fall into what are called pools, and it almost, in our situation, it almost penalizes us for growth. Because if we, by chance, get moved into the larger pool, we will get a smaller allocation.
Right.
So we are penalized for growing our business. And that's something we would like to change.
Thank you very much. On to Mr. Carey for 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I want to thank the witnesses for being here. I do want to follow up with the ICCC on some questions as well. We've heard from the beef, especially about the UK sending into CPTPP. I'm just wondering, you did mention a few of the existing trade barriers that you're facing. I was just wondering if you could comment how your companies are adapting to that. And I was wondering if you could comment on the bill C-282 that we recently had here in committee, and if that passes, how would that work with your customers and the companies you represent?
Thank you for your question, Madam Chair. First, on your first point, everything is predicated on the allocation model of the quotas. And in our situation, we face erratic allocation of quota or not enough quota, which forces us to move into what's called the transfer market, whereby I and my colleagues need to contact other quota holders and ask if they're willing to rent their quota, and of course for a fee. And unfortunately, aside from taking a lot of work and a lot of energy to do this, we have to pass those costs on, and it's Canadian consumers who suffer.
Furthermore, as well, we have a solution to some of the issues that exist. And basically, right now, the allocation model for the TRQ is based on sales performance of both domestic and imported cheeses. In our solution, we recommend that the allocation model should be based on import performance as well, in order to solve some of the issues that we're facing now with the allocation models that exist in all the agreements. We need viable economic quantities of TRQ to be allocated to individuals or companies that apply for the allocation. As well, understanding that an allocation is a privilege, if it's not used during a year, we would recommend that the allocation be forfeited for the following years. Simply stated, like in order to solve a lot of the issues, we recommend that the allocations in any treaty, even the new treaties that are being negotiated with the UK, be given to the parties that are going to use the allocation, rather than setting up a secondary market for, as my colleague Joe Del Ferro basically stated, for trade or for transfer, where there's an economic mechanism that will not benefit Canadian consumers. It'll increase the prices of our cheeses or of all products for those consumers.
Did you want to comment on Bill C-282 at all?
What we'll find, C-282 will limit the availability of cheeses for Canadian consumers around the world. It'll make it much more difficult to import cheeses from around the world.
And our position is generally stated, and we submitted it, and we appeared before a House committee a couple of weeks ago. We're not for the bill, unfortunately, and it limits, we believe it'll also limit Canada's ability to negotiate trade deals outside if it is passed. We do respect supply management, though. We understand that aspect, but we have a position on that we don't want it to go through.
Well, I appreciate that. All parties do support supply management. I guess it's kind of how we do that. I did want to talk to, I guess it's Mr. Laycraft, and just explore a little bit more. I kind of didn't know what to say when you started talking about the progress, with the bilateral and the Britain being let into the CPTPP. My understanding is you've been in conversations with the Minister's office probably at least 4 years. And I was just wondering if you could comment on because we've had the minister here, and she said she's constantly in communications and things like this, and there's a plan and they're moving forward with things. But could you let me know how have the communications been with your industry about progress? Are you seeing any progress on the resolution of these issues? The carcass beef washing issue, I think it sounds ridiculous to me. It sounds like our standard's higher than their standard, and it should be a no-brainer.
Yeah, first of all, I want to clarify, we do get briefed regularly by our negotiators, and as a rule, we have some of the best negotiators in the world. So it does kind of come back to what Stuart talked about, is giving as much strength to those negotiators in the negotiation as we can. You know, we had earlier cautioned, don't just do a transition agreement and bring the CITA agreement over. It was already full of problems. Unfortunately, that advice was not followed, and I think that was a political decision that did that. And then likewise, we said, don't get the accession conversation ahead of the bilateral. We have to get the bilateral done. So we've shared that position. That has not been the timing that has occurred, but we do, get regular briefs, and we do talk regularly with both the Minister of Agriculture and the Minister of Trade as well. So, again, we realize this is a bigger issue than just beef involved, but we'll continue to provide that advice, that get those resolved while you have some leverage to get them resolved properly.
Thank you very much. On to Ms. Dillon for 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I'll start with our witness, Mr. Beck. You have an impressive experience in the Asia-Pacific region. I wanted to ask you specifically about non-tariff trade barriers in Canada's aerospace sector. Are there any big barriers that are stopping Canadian companies from exporting to the region, and is there potential for more growth? Thank you.
Wow, that's getting pretty specific. I mean, in the context of my experience in the markets in Asia that I've worked in, and also through the Asia Pacific Foundation of Canada, we do a fairly good business. So I'll give you an example. In India, for example, in India, a lot of the aerospace products that we sell into India are components that go on airplanes, and so. The Indian aerospace industry is growing quite dramatically. I think they had a record week this week in terms of number of air travelers. The planes that are flying in India typically are flying with engines made from Pratt & Whitney. So I would say that when you're talking about that sector in particular, we benefit from being a supplier into that network, and doesn't really have any NTBs that are associated with it, because Pratt & Whitney does their negotiation with the big plane suppliers, Boeing and others. So I mean, from my own experience, I don't see the aerospace as being hampered that much, but I'm not an expert on that particular industry, and I think you'd have to talk to somebody who has more experience in that area. We do quite well if you're talking again in selling helicopters, for example, and that is again a company that's coming out of Montreal, and one that has been quite successful in the markets that I've worked in. But that is a full frame, and again, parts are sold into that, and that it's not impacted also in the aftermarket as well. I mean, not from my experience, we do quite well in that particular space.
I thank you so much for your time. My next question will be for the Canadian Cattle Association. I wanted to ask you specifically about beef exports to Japan, Canada's second largest market for beef. How has the CPTPP agreement in general helped in removing non-tariff trade barriers for the industry, and where have you seen the most growth?
So thanks for your question. And Japan falls right in behind United States as our second largest export market. And recently, Japan has dropped all restrictions that I talked about earlier in regards of the BSE years. So in a perfect world, if we could have all the markets similar to Japan, it would be what we would ask for.
And I'd like to ask you, just in general, how the CPTPP has benefited beef exports, just in general.
Definitely, that agreement has favored the beef industry tremendously.
Perfect. I thank you so much, and I like your tie as well. It's
Thank you.
Cows on it. Very cute. My next question is for CAFTA. In 2021, our government agreed to undertake a free trade agreement with the Association of Southeast Asian Nations. Could you tell me what non-tariff trade barriers you would prioritize removing in a potential FTA and why? Thank you.
Yeah, I'll just say huge opportunities throughout ASEAN for CAFTA and our members, where we think that should be Canada's top trade priority right now. The opportunities there are great. When we look at all of our everything from minimum residue limits and some of that low-level presence, tariff barriers, non-tariff barriers, I should say, those are key for us. A lot of the biotechnology and some of the emerging issues related to biotech, seeing some of the coordination around those types of issues will be huge for us. And again, some of the issues related to beef and meat in general are things that we think, with the removal of which will be enormously beneficial for Canadian agri-food producers.
Perfect. And would you like to add anything else?
Just that, as well as weed seeds are an issue in that area of the world and I think a lot of it what comes down to, so we're very thankful for the Indo-Pacific Strategy and the Indo-Pacific Agriculture Office. A lot of those discussions are very technical, and so we have one of the best negotiators and trade commissioners, but we need more technical expertise because a lot of these non-tariff trade barriers are very technical in nature, and we need Canadian technocrats to resolve them. But CPTPP has benefited agriculture hugely, and CAFTA represents 90% of all food exported in Canada. So that's one of the reasons we want to maintain its high level.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. I'll go back to Mr. Beck.
Sorry, time is up. Thank you very much. On to Mr. Savard-Tremblay for 2.5 minutes, please.
Oui, ben, en fait,
Well, my next question has to do with CAFTA. You talked about restrictions, sanitary and health restrictions. When you talk about the need for science-based decisions, does that mean that the UK's restrictions are too strict or that they're not science-based? How do you compare this? We heard from beef exporters comment about this. For you, what is really the issue with the restrictions?
I'll say quickly, everybody believes it's science-based and that science should be at the heart of any technical barriers to trade, and food safety and all of those things matter to everybody. It matter to us too. With respect to the UK, I think it's a recognition of our systems ultimately, that we say we have the most high quality, robust systems in the world, and they should be recognized as such. And I think that's one of the core disagreements related right now. Dave, I don't know if you have anything to add.
Yeah, just again, around carcass washing, which our colleagues have spoken to, it's just a recognition that we have not addressed the issues that existed under CITA. They've now been replicated through CPTPP, and we're hoping they get resolved through the bilateral. But SPS are often used as a trade. They're textually used for protectionism, but we do have concerns with the UK's ability to meet Canada's standards, to be honest, not the other way around.
Appelez-vous vous aussi à ce qu'on règle cette...
Would you like this issue to be addressed before accession as well to the CPTPP?
CAFTA's position. CAFTA has a long-standing position of growing the CPTPP, but we cannot erode it at all. We've said no to other countries because they can't meet the standards. We need to get our bilateral house in order with the UK and then have a discussion about accession talks.
Merci.
Thank you.
On to Mr. Cannings for 2.5 minutes, please.
Okay, just like one more question about cheese, and that is, you briefly mentioned 282 here, which we've discussed at this committee, obviously, and your concerns with it, and you have these other concerns about the TRQ, the quota system. It strikes me, and I'm not an expert here, that the quota system is more of a problem for you. Like if we got rid of 282, you would still have a difficult situation before you, right?
We've lived alongside supply management since the 1970s, and we stand by supply management. What we would like to see is that the quotas be allocated on performance-based. In a sense, we should be measured on with companies on how they import cheese versus what is produced in Canada. And that's what causes the disadvantage for us at the moment. If we were to allocate quota based on cheese importation, it would be a far more balanced approach for the marketplace.
So I guess my question, and I didn't put it very well, was if we solve the quota situation, would you be in a situation where you could, have a good thriving business and have
it allow more variety of cheeses to enter Canada and for better prices for Canadian consumers.
Okay.
Just to add quickly, with the CPTPP agreement and the CUSMA agreement, the allocation is thwarted to one side of the TRQ. So it's been given to a particular group, 85% of it. So the rest of the importers are left with only 15. So there is more access, but the access is limited down to only 15% of the total access.
Okay. I was going to have one more question, but
35 seconds.
Oh, 35 seconds. Okay, I'll go to Mr. Carey. And you talked about that Canada needed, as I understood it, more capacity to actually manage the trade agreements after we sign them. And maybe you were talking about that with the technocrats. But just maybe you could take 20 seconds now and tell us exactly what's...
Yeah, the United States Trade Representative's Office has an entire team, about 12 people, dedicated to the implementation of trade deals, so the spirit of the deals being carried out. We've advocated for that in Canada. It hasn't gone far, unfortunately, but there is also a time where it's not about politics, it's not about trade commissioners, they're just technical discussions need to happen, and they need to happen over a long period of time where trust can be built. Many instances where a shipment is rejected because of a concern of a pest, that pest doesn't even exist in Canada. If we had an entomologist in the region that could walk us through, which is why the Indo-Pacific Agriculture Office under the Indo-Pacific Strategy is so attractive to all agriculture exporters.
Okay, thank you very much. Mr. Baldinelli for 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you to the witnesses for being with us this afternoon. I'm just going to build on what my colleague line of questioning, and I'm going to go first with the International Cheese Council, Mr. Del Ferro, if I could. Listening to your presentation and that of others, for example, we've had Mondo Foods here and Tree of Life. The discussions centered not so much with regards to the market access that's been provided. Those have been set by CUSMA, CITA, and CPTPP. But what the concern has been, and what we were hearing, is about the TRQs. It's the quota allocation. And you said it best about CITA and the lack of certainty in the small distributors and how, unfortunately, you're getting to a point where you can't compete. I just want to ask two questions. You talk about the government instituted review that's taking place in 2019. It's been taking part since 2019. You've had the ability, I would have imagined, to feed into that. Now, are you hearing reasons why it's taking so long?
Frankly, specific reasons, no. It's just under review. It's been postponed. And we're just waiting for a positive outcome for all parties concerned.
Well, given that it's 2019, have you had an ability to update information, have recent meetings with the government on this? You would think it would be a priority. We're risking these small and medium-sized companies. Like we were talking earlier, I have a facility in Niagara Falls, a great place called Roaming Cheese Products.
Yes.
Fabulous. Their products are all over Ontario and in fact in Canada. But they're a distributor as well. And, the challenges that they face. So are you hearing anything, reasons why it's taking so long?
Specific reasons, no, but we are equally frustrated because we need resolution because it's extremely challenging for us to plan, to forecast, and to promote future business under these circumstances.
Now, secondly, you talked about the difficulties and, that lack of certainty, primarily with CITA. And, some years it changes your quota allocation. And so you may face that prospect of having to rent or purchase some quota from others. Now, is there a regime in place that dictates what the price of that? Or is it just an open market? So every year you could be paying a little bit more, a little bit less.
That is correct, sir. It's an open market.
Right, yeah, which makes it even more of an impact on your
Makes it very
your
challenging to
small,
forecast, to
medium-sized
plan,
enterprises.
and ultimately it's the Canadian consumer who pays the price.
Who ultimately pays the price. Thank you for that. I'd like to go on now to the Canadian Agri-Food Trade Alliance, and Mr. Carey, you had talked in your presentation about some of the trade barriers that existed, and you talked about direct government support, in essence. And most people would think monetary support, government policies, regulatory approach. But here, we recently reviewed Bill C-282. What it would do is preclude discussions of our supply managed sectors when the Canadian government undertakes new trade negotiations. With CUSMA up for renewal in the next couple of years, we're currently working on a Canada-UK trade agreement. We've just had, the UK assent through CPTPP. Now, do you see this as kind of a trade irritant that is just waiting to happen?
Yes, in short. I think years from now, if 282 does pass, then countries, parliamentarians around the world will be discussing Canada in the same light that we're discussing the UK and India, because we've legislated out a massive part of our sector, as opposed to negotiating, making sure supply management gets a deal, is protected. 282 will be viewed internationally by our trading partners as a trade irritant, and will impact also future WTO negotiations around agriculture, for sure.
Thank you. Madam Chair, how much time do... How much? Mr. Beck, would you have any comments on that?
I would agree.
Thank you.
I would agree with what he says.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Mr. Miao, for 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you to all the witnesses for appearing today. First, through the Chair, I'd like to turn online to Mr. Beck. Currently, our government is exploring or working on a number of trade agreements with countries in the Asia-Pacific region. As I'm sure you're aware of, what do you think the key areas of focus should be in terms of addressing non-tariff barriers in Asia-Pacific region?
Well, again, in the context of CPTPP, a lot of the non-tariff trade barriers were addressed. I mean, it doesn't necessarily mean that they don't emerge in various ways, and it's because it is complex, and in many cases it's technical. I think you're taking a look at the big markets that we're talking about. I think it needs to be addressed in a Canada-ASEAN free trade agreement in terms of how that and where we should be kind of putting our emphasis on the types of agreement that we had with the CPTPP. It's really the gold standard of agreements, and if we can replicate it, it'd be much more difficult in ASEAN, as you can imagine, because of the types of countries that are part of ASEAN. But there's no harm in trying. In the context of India, which is, again, a really important market for us, we've tried. As I said, when I left Delhi in 2014, we'd already gone through 7 rounds of negotiation. There's lots of other issues that are there that are probably hindering a completion of a comprehensive economic partnership agreement. So having an early progress agreement that will deal with some of, hopefully, in the context of what we're willing to offer and what they're willing to offer, deal with some of the most important NTBs. And that's all part of what the negotiators need to be able to understand. It's going to require us to give in some areas, and hopefully the Indians will reciprocate. But again, our focus should be on dealing with some of those big issues at the front end that we need to deal with. Some of them are almost impossible to complete, just due to the nature of the Indian economy and how we approach it. But at least it's something we should try, and we should find areas where there's common ground. And hopefully we can offer something that's attractive enough that they can deal with some of the agriculture NTBs, which are really important to the Canadian economy, particularly the agricultural economy.
Thank you for that. And next, through the Chair, I'd like to ask my question to Canadian Agri-Food Trade Alliance. How have the non-tariff barrier evolved over time for Canadian agriculture industry? And are there any emerging trends in terms of non-tariff trade barriers that you're currently monitoring?
They've increased, certainly post-COVID. We've seen a rise of protectionism. Maybe I'll let Adam touch on some of the specifics, but they certainly are on the rise, and they've increased significantly.
Yeah, just to give you a couple of statistics, in the year 2000, there was 1 million non-tariff measures that we could identify. Today, there's over 4 million. So in 20 years, we've gone from 1 million to 4 million. And these are equivalent of real hard trade disruptive tariffs, usually the equivalent between 25 and 40%. A non-tariff barrier is the equivalent of a 40% tariff in some cases. So these block trade effectively, and that's bad news for agri-food exporters.
Thank you. And let's talk about canola in Japan. How has the demand for canola in Japan increased over the past 5 years? And what role do international trade agreements, such as the CPTPP, play in addressing the non-tariff barrier when exporting canola to the Japan market?
I work in the canola sector in my day job. So, yeah, Japan is one of the most important markets for canola exports. We have a long-standing, long-established, very solid relationship with the Japanese. I don't have the Japanese trade statistics for 2022, but 2021, it was $1.7 billion worth of exports, which is, for canola, our third largest market. Japan is a country that likes to import canola seed that they then crush for their own, for cooking oil, for whatever they choose to do. So Japan's biggest concern from Canada is getting it. So the Japanese come to Canada every year. We host a delegation of Japanese. The Japanese biggest concern is just they want our canola, and they actually want our canola more. In canola, our biggest competitor is Australia, but they prefer Canadian canola. They want that high quality oil. So our relationship with Japan is very solid. Trade agreements will certainly help, but Canada and Japan have a very long-standing bilateral relationship, CAFTA as well, with the Japanese trade officials here in Ottawa. So the Japanese market is critical. It's stable. It's been a bellwether for the Canadian canola sector for decades.
Okay, thank you very much. On to Mr. Sheehan for 5 minutes. No, I'm sorry, I got Mr. Barlow. I'm sorry, I was thinking of Mr. Martel, and I know he's got a problem with the headset that doesn't meet the standards for the translators. So otherwise, I wasn't going to miss you, Mr. Martel, but Mr. Barlow, please.
That's okay. Well, welcome to the team, Mr. Sheehan. That's fine. We'll find a spot for you. Don't worry. Just to quickly to Mr. Beck, and I thought you made an interesting comment earlier in your testimony, and you said that we have to start looking at agriculture and agri-food as a geopolitical tool. And I couldn't agree with you more in that assessment. Or look at it as in the geopolitical scope of what we offer. And I would say after COVID, and certainly with the Russia's illegal invasion of Ukraine, we do not need to lean more on our most trusted trading partners and not on the bad actors that are around the world. Can you maybe expand on that, the role Canadian agri-food could play as a geopolitical tool, and Canada's role in helping not only feed Canadians but feed the world?
Well, it's easy to say that we have, probably the largest freshwater resources in the world. When you're a trade commissioner, you go out to market Canada, and I often would say, look, we have lots of land, we have lots of water, we can grow a lot of products. And so the issue becomes, again, a lot of it is trade and how trade barriers and how we can choose the markets that we want to go to and also be able to get into those markets. So it's a geopolitical tool, much like, I spent quite a bit of time when I was in India trying to build the ability for us to export natural gas to India. And at this, in the best and easiest place to do it is off the east coast of Canada. Our biggest challenge is our own challenge, is being able to get the resource to the coast and to be able to ship it. It's the same thing with agriculture. It's a resource that's in demand globally, and how we approach it. And I think what's being done in the Indo-Pacific strategy, I agree, having an office in Asia focused on agriculture is going to be critical, because it is something that we'll always be able to rely on, and it's going to create tremendous opportunity for Canada, and creates great income for us. So,
yeah, thanks. I appreciate you bringing energy into that, because certainly I would say Canadian resources like energy and agriculture are critical geopolitical tools. And when two of our most important allies, two of the strongest economies in the world in Germany and Japan, come to Canada and ask for our help when it comes to Canadian energy and to cut their umbilical cord, let's say, or cut the ties from Russia and stop funding Russia's war machine. It is extremely disappointing, I would think is an understatement, for Canada to turn its back on two of our most trusted trading partners and not come to an agreement to supply them with Canadian LNG. So I appreciate you raising that issue. Now on to CAFTA, Mr. Taylor. I was stunned with your number about the increase to 4 million non-tariff trade barriers that are occurring in terms of global trade. Has CAFTA done an assessment on the economic impact of those trade barriers to Canada's agri-food industry, for example?
Yeah, we're updating our numbers now, but we've looked at it automatically. I mean, these numbers show up to a 40% tariff. Like, just tariffs could fall to zero in an FTA, but if non-tariff barriers persist, that's the equivalent of a 40% tariff barrier. So that just, we'd lose opportunity right there. In CITA, we were supposed to have $2 billion of access annually to that market. We've got a fraction of that, while their trade surplus is growing every day. So we're making grounds, but not near what we were promised when that agreement was first signed. We're trying to update some numbers, but the numbers are staggering when you look at the potential lost.
So to that, Mr. Taylor, maybe even to what Mr. Beck was saying, with CETA and allowing the accession or in the process of allowing the UK accession into the CPTPP and not addressing some of these problems, what is the current government missing in terms of addressing some of these? I would assume that we want to show some strength, a position of strength when it comes to negotiating trade agreements or addressing when these gaps become apparent, and it doesn't seem like we're doing that. What are we missing, or what is the current regime failing to address when it comes to improving these trade agreements or ensuring that new trade agreements don't have these trade barriers that are impacting Canadian producers?
Ultimately, it's using our leverage. We need to be strategic in terms of the sequence of how we negotiate things. And I think putting the UK accession ahead of the UK bilateral, we lost that leverage. We could have said, no, we're not going to move that forward until we address these things, and we're not going to repeat the same mistakes we made in CETA. And I think that would have been a more advantageous outcome for us. And that's now why. So that's on its track, and now we got to fix it in the bilateral. And whatever tools parliamentarians perhaps have to try and help us do that would be very beneficial to our sector.
Okay, thank you very much. Now, Mr. Sheehan for 5 minutes.
Well, thank you very much. And my question, I think, will be first to Stuart. And first of all, thanks to all the folks for presenting these non-trade tariff barriers. We're planning a trip, Madam Chair, to the ASEAN countries, India, and I want to tap on Mr. Beck's extensive knowledge about the Indo-Pacific region. We're going to be meeting with different people over there, so what advice would you give all of us that are the ones that go on this trip when meeting with some of our counterparts? What kind of non-trade barriers are happening in those regions, and are there common non-trade tariff barriers amongst countries in that area or similar to? Just if you would like to address that.
Yeah, I think most of the common ones would be around agriculture and agricultural products, because, again, agriculture is a sensitive sector for most of the economies in the region. And if you're going to ASEAN and India in particular, I think you'll find that out. I mean, that's just the nature of how their economy has grown. Or how it exists. And I still remember when I was being posted from San Francisco to Delhi in 2010, I was just amazed by how the press was consumed by the monsoon season and how much rain was going to come and how that was going to impact India's GDP. So it's understandable why it's a very sensitive sector, and how they develop their own NTPs around that is really related to partly the geopolitical relationship that exists with us and them, and partly to the reality on the ground of what's happening. The same is true in other markets in ASEAN. So I think that's one of the ones that you'll probably have to address in your conversations, and it's something that you're going to want to try and understand. And and again, it's really understanding where they're coming from and why they want to create that environment. And they won't be too forthcoming because as someone was saying on the panel, there's now 4 million different types of NTB. So there's many different ways that you can approach that. But essentially, what you want is a set of rules of the game that we can all live by. And that doesn't mean that people are going to necessarily follow them. And I can give you lots of examples of where it doesn't happen, even though you have tariffs in place and you think you have rules in place. It's just, again, partly the reality of doing business and the practical elements that you have to consider. So in your conversation, find out where they're coming from and what are their biggest concerns and how we can work around that and how we can be partners in helping them solve some of their problems. And that will help eliminate some of those potential NTBs.
That's very sage advice. Thank you for that. And, I've had opportunities to travel to that area. They are very concerned about climate change, rain. And there are a lot of coastal areas where they're very concerned on how that is affecting, their country. So I just noted when you were talking about monsoon season and such that they certainly do. A lot of the coastal towns that are ports as well that have challenges with the rising tides and water. Madam Chair, my next question is to the cattle people. Jack, I'm also co-chair of Canada-Japan, and yes, they love our beef, they love our canola, they love our pork. You go to a store and it's in Tokyo, it's everywhere. And Anjou had asked a question about the CPTPP agreement. And I recall that being one of the original signatories and doing this expeditiously allowed for 2 tariff lifts and really helped the cattlemen at that particular time. Could you explain that to the committee again, like how that benefited your members?
Colleague Dennis Laycraft, he'll have the numbers right in front of him there. So go ahead, Dennis.
Okay, Dennis, you need to unmute yourself.
I think he may not have his headset.
I'm sorry?
He may not have his headset selected.
You may have a problem with your headset. Okay. Yes. Try it again.
So going back to the original agreement on CTPP, one of our advantages of being one of the early countries signing on to it was the ability to bring down tariffs quicker, and that was key. And then within our, we went back to carcass wash and all that, comparing that to the CETA agreement and the EU and the UK agreement, it puts us at a disadvantage within that compared to the CTPP.
Signatories, we have a little bit more mobility in being able to negotiate with future countries. To your point, I think today. And
Okay.
Next question, or are we out of time?
Your 5 minutes is up, sir.
Right. Okay.
Right. All right.
Next time
Committee has some house business to take care of, so I'm going to say thank you very much for the valuable information from our witnesses today. If you can just excuse yourselves so we can go in camera, please. I will suspend for now. Thank you.